Today's episode is all about innovation in infrastructure. Now let me start by sharing with you one construction company's vision. Balfour Beatty's Innovation 2050 provides the company's vision about what the job site will look like in the future. Now here's what it says. The site will be human-free. Robots will work in teams to build complex structures. Drones will fly overhead to scan the site. Humans will serve to be the overseers to remotely manage multiple projects at the same time. Check out its 10 predictions for 2050. The industry will become increasingly focused on innovation. We will see new business models and services for infrastructure. New materials will help infrastructure respond to its surroundings. New jobs and industries will be created. Infrastructure will become multifunctional. Robots will take over construction. 3D and 4D printing will self-assemble objects. We will have new disruptive ideas to make mass transit faster. We will experience the growth of wearable technology such as exoskeletons. Finally, direct neural control of devices and vehicles will be accessible to the industry. Basically, this means AI, as you know, artificial intelligence, will take over our job sites. Balfour Beatty argues that technology is here today. Now, I have to agree with all of this. And I love the company's optimism about the future opportunities that we all have in construction. But I think we have a lot of work in terms of training our people and overhauling our process before we can achieve what is on this list. Now let's look at another prediction for innovation in infrastructure. McKinsey says we need to have 3 layers in order to build smart cities and infrastructure. First, we need the technology base. This includes networks, connected devices, and sensors embedded into the city. Next, we need smart applications. This will provide the data analysis capabilities that is necessary to keep our smart cities humming. Finally, we need adoption and usage. We all know technology only provides value when we leverage the data. When we do, it can lead to better decisions and a change in behavior. Let me share one more example with you. ID TechX predicts that we will see the rise of movable cities. Houses won't require infrastructure because they will grab their own water and make their own electricity. Later versions will add generators. This is partly triggered by new vulnerabilities with the grid. If there is an attack in a city, it can simply pick up and move. This is pretty far off. Now, I know that's what you're thinking, but it's something to keep an eye on. When it comes to smart cities in general, Markets and Markets says we will see a surge through 2023, roughly $717 billion. Now, this is a lot of money and a lot of innovation that is coming, and we still need to discuss how to fund it and what are the right steps we need to take if we want this $717 billion to be spent effectively. We need to have an open and candid conversation about it. Much has been said about the state of our poor infrastructure, but what really is needed is some really great and creative new innovation. Let's talk about some really creative examples. How about spinning old tires into better roads? Or building walls out of utility poles? Or turning bottles into bridges? Or think about this, converting railroad ties and wood pallets into biomass fuel. My next guest has a unique perspective into the topic of innovation in infrastructure. Please welcome Barry Breede, who is the author of Transforming the Utility Pole and the Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer at Koppers Utility and Industrial Products. Barry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Peggy. It's good to be with you.
So tell us a little bit about Koppers Utility and Industrial.
Yeah, that's a mouthful, I know. Well, Koppers Utility and Industrial Products is a division of Koppers, Inc., and we are the largest American-owned provider of utility poles in the United States. So we have a real vested interest in the infrastructure of the United States, and Koppers, our parent company, is also the largest provider of railroad ties, wooden railroad ties in the United States. So they too have a real vested interest, obviously, in infrastructure.
So making of that, some of the things is you have some interesting ideas on how to actually solve the infrastructure problem. So tell me a little bit about that, because you've had some creative suggestions on that. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I think, to frame the issue initially, it's important to kind of think about, not just infrastructure in the, I guess, in the sense of money, which tends to be where the conversation unfortunately always seems to go, but to also think about how to apply innovation into that process. And if you look back at our country, maybe the last 100 years or so, you'll see that major infrastructure was really accomplished not just by having funding predominantly at the federal level available, but also having innovation come alongside that. And that includes really even going back to the days of the WPA, where the actual dollar amounts that were spent were not all that terrific, certainly in today's terms. But what was there was a very large workforce of unemployed individuals, predominantly lower skilled individuals, that could be looked at as an innovation asset, really, and applied into that infrastructure issue. And as you know, the results were tremendous during that time frame. And then if you fast forward another, say, 25 to 30 years from that, and the next big infrastructure build out, if you will, which was really kind of post-World War II, I should say, suburbia, you see again that innovation played a strong role in that process. And while the federal government supplied things like the GI loan and FHA loans to help make housing more affordable, what really drove a lot of that was the ability of private industry to convert wartime factories into the ability to produce mass housing. And so for the first time, you had a housing industry that wasn't just dependent on craftsmen, but could actually produce housing at a very large scale. And I think, again, those are just examples of how you can bring innovation into into the process of infrastructure development.
Well, that's a great point, though. I mean, you raise a very good point, is the idea of thinking innovatively. I mean, because you're saying that where the government has to do things to make us think, it's not just about money. And we always think about, when we think about infrastructure, we think about raising taxes. Now, we need the money, we need investment, but sometimes that investment spurs innovation. And that's what you're talking about now, is the idea we have to spur innovation. And sometimes it has to be brought with, how higher education or how we creatively think. And that's what you're suggesting now, is that we have to think outside creatively our traditional ways to use resources that we waste to creatively redevelop and recreate our roads.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I guess, in some, you can't have legacy infrastructure that is built around legacy thinking. You've got to be much more modern in your approach to this. And I think even in today's world, especially, historically, we're talking about issues that were predominantly focused on baby boomers. In other words, they were the people that were going to vote and pay for this. Well, that's not the case anymore, or it won't be. It'll be the millennial generation. And I think those priorities are far different. We look at them through our prism of our business, and you see things like climate change and the importance of sustainability to this audience. And I would argue more of a desire to have localized funding or state funding deal with some of these issues, as opposed to waiting for the stalemate in Washington to kind of uncork itself and provide federal funding. So the fact that you've got a new generation, if you will, that's going to be involved in this process, I think it's vitally important that people that are in the innovation area really understand that and try to build their businesses and their response accordingly.
Is that our problem when we think about what's happening in Washington, is they can't agree because they're thinking old school? They're not thinking about the new millennials, the new Generation Z, and what inspires them, what motivates them. Because if we think we need roads, we need bridges, we need these dams to be reconfigured, rebuilt, because we need them, right? We have to have them. We need to have them for many things. If we want to fix them, we have to help them understand why, and these big dollar investments we're talking about aren't just going to happen, but we have to think about how we can solve them in ways that are meaningful to these generations we're talking about, millennials, Generation Z, and generations to come afterwards, who are going to have to take care of the world.
Absolutely, and not to politicize this concept at all, but I think you see today that with this introduction of the so-called, I believe it's the new Green Deal, you see a train of thought that runs almost opposite or is, ridiculed to some extent, I think, by the baby boomer generation as being out of touch. But I would argue that maybe a lot of the components, at least of the thought process behind this new Green Deal, really reflect millennial values.
But when you look at that, when you think about reflecting millennial values in the concept, the extreme thought process, some might say, are just out there, but potentially it's understanding what is the idea behind that. You have to look, peel the onion, layers of the onion back is what you're saying. And that's what you're proposing here.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a lot of people that would say, boy, there's a lot of extremism in that concept of a new Green Deal. But if you just look at kind of the fundamental thinking behind it, what it's trying to achieve from a sustainability standpoint, I think those are values that are held up pretty well by the millennial generation.
Can we look at taking care of our infrastructure in lots of different ways? Are there things we can be doing? I mean, are there new things we need to be? Is it looking at new materials? I mean, we always think of things as concrete, asphalt. Are there other ways that we should be looking at saying, are there new ways of repairing these things? Are there, again, like what you're saying, should we be looking at things differently going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one great area that is actually, I think, getting more traction today just because the efficacy of the product is starting to really improve is how we can take tires, once they're used, and recycle them into effectively a replacement for asphalt paving. We've now got a product that from what I see and believe, is far more performance oriented. It's able to perform at or above asphalt and do it at a cheaper price. And ultimately there you've got a sustainability story also that is very interesting, I think, to a lot of folks.
Do you think at this point, if we thought there were other materials, wouldn't our engineering Corps of Engineers come up with solutions that we could have applied to these things at this point to say, here's what we should bring to our society to build these new roads and bridges that we need? Wouldn't they have come up to say, here's what we need to do at this point?
Well, again, I think a little of that, and I don't mean to throw darts here, but a little of that comes back to what I was saying earlier about innovation. And I think you tend to get kind of siloed, everybody does, in their thought process and in their work, and they tend to look for the same true response to an issue. So when it comes to material substitution, that may not even be on their radar screen, simply because they're not exposed to it, or the company or the entity won't allow them to go down that path because they've built such a legacy around a certain type of thinking and therefore a certain kind of output in terms of what the work has to be.
So what types of materials is your company exploring? Are you suggesting there's other things besides that you're suggesting, besides tires and others, that you're saying would do better?
Well, no, we're very fortunate in that we work with probably the from a carbon standpoint, one of the best materials in the world, which is wood. And so, for us, we're trying to kind of figure out how do you maximize not only the value of that wood, but also maximize kind of how you apply it into your business. So a lot of our thinking right now, and you hear this buzzword quite a bit, is in this concept of the circular economy. And how do you take back material and ultimately repurpose it so that you can create effectively a new one of it, whatever it is, utilizing old materials that have heretofore been disposed of. And we're doing a lot of work in that area right now. And I think you'll probably hear from us very soon in terms of a commercialization opportunity around that.
When you look to the future, what do you see is going to happen when we talk about infrastructure? There's a lot happening. There's a lot of discussion, and we have to do something. When it comes to innovation, you're saying your company will hear a lot, but what do you see the future when it comes talk about innovation then?
Well, again, I think it's going to have to uphold some values that maybe, again, the baby boomers didn't always embrace. I'll give you one kind of interesting example in our business. We were looking for a way to add value to our business, but we compete in what is effectively a commodity industry, utility poles. It's very hard to differentiate one pole from another, and I think most people probably don't even pay attention to a wood utility pole in their neighborhood. But what we realized, if we were going to get out of this kind of commodity trap, is we had to add services around that pole that would be of value. And one thing that we realized early on is this notion of connectivity, and how to bring connectivity, if you will, into a utility pole, which seems almost, in some respects, impossible to do. But what we did is we began by exploring the use of radio frequency identification as a way of inserting that concept or that technology into our utility poles. And we built a subsidiary business that works with utilities now and allows utilities to get a real-time understanding of their assets, meaning their poles and the transformers and everything else that's on those poles, where they're deployed and the condition of them. So it's really kind of thinking about, again, in areas of the business where you can create innovation, create business value, and at the same time address the market in a way in which the market is thinking, which we thought and continue to think is this notion of being a more connected society, if you will.
Well, Barry Breede, the author of Transforming the Utility Pole and the Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer at Koppers Utility and Industrial Products, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peggy. I appreciate the time.
When it comes time to implement new innovation and infrastructure projects, we need the funding. Different states take different approaches. For this segment, let's dig into what's happening in the state of Michigan. Up north, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer recently proposed to increase the gas tax. To dive into this a little bit more, today I'm joined by Lance Binoniemi, Vice President of Government Affairs, Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association. Lance, I'm so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So Lance, let's talk about all these funding proposals. Give me some details on those if you could.
Sure. 2 years ago, the state came out with the 21st Infrastructure Council report that showed that we need $2.5 to $2.6 billion more annually for all of our infrastructure, roads, bridges, some of water and sewers. And so Governor Whitmer, as she did on the campaign trail, committed to fixing our roads and bridges in Michigan. And so she put a proposal out there that increases Michigan's gas tax by 45 cents. That is phased in over 3 budget cycles or a year and a half in Michigan right now because we are in the middle of one. And we'll raise the over $2.4 billion for our roads and bridges and finally find a long-term solution in Michigan.
45 cents, big talk about that. I think a lot of people have been talking about how she was able to do that. So let's talk about which proposals right now that you're favoring, because I think that's a pretty big deal to get 45 cents and things like that. So which proposal are you favoring at this point?
Yeah, at MITA, the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, we support traditional user fees to fund our roads and bridges and our transportation network in Michigan. So we are 100% behind the governor's proposal. It is actually the only real solution that's on the table. The legislature has not come up with the necessary investment in any of their proposals to really accomplish a long-term sustainable goal. So right now we are 100% behind Governor Whitmer.
So looking at that, being behind the governor and looking at user fees, how effective then is that? Because we've seen in the past, we've not seen infrastructure proposals really successful in enough to get the consumers to understand they've got to do this. This is really the first one that really says, look, we're going right up to the people right now and understanding. We've seen Las Vegas has had some success. Now the governor here in Michigan, you guys are saying, look, we're really putting it back out to everybody out there that lives in Michigan and says, you've got to do it and we've got to do it. This is our state.
Yeah, and we're not certain whether or not the legislature will embrace the governor's proposal. They have not yet. We're hopeful to convince the legislature to do so. But you're right. We passed a funding proposal in 2015 in Michigan where we raised our registration fees by 20%. We raised our gas tax by 7 cents per gallon. And the unfortunate aspect of the 2015 proposal was it wasn't enough. And so the citizens in Michigan, got increases in their user fees, and the roads didn't get fixed and still are going to decline in deterioration. And so this governor, I think, if nothing else, has put a proposal out there that actually solves the problem. And so if the legislature decides that this isn't what they want to support, we've asked them, where do you support $2.5 billion in more investment? It does sound like a daunting number. The 45-cent gas tax increase is a sticker shock for a lot of people, but it shows the just enormous need that we have in Michigan. What grade did the ASCE give you guys in your state? We were a D+ on roads. We were a D-, I believe, on bridges. So we need significant investment to bring those up. And, what we did in the 90s in Michigan, we passed a gas tax that wasn't enough. We didn't adjust to inflation, our gas tax, so it didn't rise since 96. And we bonded in the late 90s and early 2000s that we're still paying for those bonds. And so, again, this solution is finally a long-term solution. We got to that 90% good and fair condition road pavement in the late 90s, early 2000s, but unfortunately, those proposals didn't really have anything in there to sustain that level.
When you look at that, I mean, and something happens, these are the ones that you have to really face the hard facts of saying, something's going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty unless we do this. I mean, we have to call out our legislators and say to them, look, if we don't do this on a nationwide basis, something really bad is going to happen. That's how bad our infrastructure is. Don't you agree?
We absolutely agree, and it's unfortunate that we find this in our underground infrastructure in Michigan all the time as well. It's unfortunate we don't respond until there is a crisis on the table, and we don't want to get to that point. We don't want to scare citizens in Michigan to think that a bridge could potentially crumble, that they drive over. But at the end of the day, we've got over half of our bridges that are structurally deficient, and we need to upgrade those facilities. We've been putting just Band-Aids everywhere. We put, plywood, we call them plywood diapers, to catch the concrete underneath the bridge decks. We have had to put temporary beams up in place to hold bridges up to make sure that they are safe. And that, at that point, you're just wasting money. You're putting short-term fixes to make sure you get by, but you're not really investing, you're not really doing the proper fix.
And that's the problem. You're wasting a lot more money long-term than what you're doing. Well, I have to tell you, Lance Binoniemi, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, I wish you guys much success. Let me know how things turn out. We want to keep following what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Today we are talking all about innovations in infrastructure. 5G is coming to our infrastructure and to our cities. We need to have a real conversation about how this is going to change the way we construct our infrastructure of tomorrow. To dive into this topic a little bit deeper today, I'm joined by Jonathan Adelstein, President and CEO of the Wireless Infrastructure Association. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Jonathan, let's talk about the infrastructure and smart cities. And what's your take on what's been happening in the past few years?
Well, we're really been putting cities in a better position by building out wireless networks in them. So far, it's been 4G or fourth generation technology, which has allowed a lot of broadband data, but we're getting excited about the possibility of what 5G offers to cities in terms of smart communities, in terms of the amount of infrastructure that's going to be put in these cities, and in terms of what it enables, from connected cars to all kinds of new healthcare opportunities, educational opportunities. It's going to be a revolution, really, in wireless.
But let's really talk about that, because 4G is really different. We're not talking comparing apples to oranges here, or apples to apples, when we talk about 4G and 5G, because 5G really opens up a lot of different things for cities. What really is 5G when you talk about what the capabilities are, when you talk about autonomous vehicles, healthcare for the city? 5G is really completely different. I think people get confused when they think 4G really means and then 5G are the same thing. We're not really talking about the same thing.
Well, people are really excited about 5G because, as you say, it's maybe the most transformational standard in the history of American telecommunications. It enables not just faster downloads and more bandwidth, which everybody's going to love, and people will see that in their daily lives, but it really enables many more devices, 100 times more devices to be put on the network. It enables the not just the speeds, but the responsiveness, latency we call it. The amount of delay goes down to just less than 0.10 milliseconds. It's so brief that you can do remote surgery, you can do new kinds of gaming, you can do all kinds of applications that couldn't be dreamed of before. So with all these devices on the network, it enables what we call a much more expansive Internet of Things, where devices are connected, which means in cities you have, smart parking sensors and smart lighting and trash removal that makes more sense, from bus stops and light poles being changed to helping cities operate more efficiently. So this is really exciting for us.
So when we talk about using the Internet of Things and bringing down the low latency, as you described just now with 5G, there's really an exciting time to do things faster, quicker, and easier than what we've ever seen before with what 5G is going to bring in smart cities. And one of the really exciting things, I think, when we talk about 5G is really protection, safety. I think a lot of us don't think about that in lighting and how 5G actually is going to enable a lot of things when we talk about the lighting in cities and the connectedness about how our cities actually might even be a little bit safer overall. When you look at it that way?
I think so. Yeah, you mentioned lighting, which would be smart lighting. If somebody goes into an area, it can light up more, but also there can be monitoring done remotely and 360. But for our first responders, it's a revolution as well. Our first responders now, when they enter into a burning building, are going to know what's going on inside of there in advance. They can get 3D blueprints. They can have real-time information coming in video out of there. They can know. We were talking to some firefighters today, as a matter of fact, about how when they enter a building, they get so much more information going in. Or if they go and they get an alarm, often there are false alarms. They're saying, well, they had to go to a mall, look inside to figure out where it is, go out of their truck into the building, figure out which part of the mall the issues coming from, get back in their truck and go to that part of the mall. Now they'll have all that information before they go in, so they can go right to the source of the problem immediately. So it's going to help our first responders be safer, but it'll also help them keep us safer and allow us to really, I think, monitor communities better, and it will be a much safer environment for public safety in the entire community.
When we talk about smart cities and having to build up into 5G, we have to build the infrastructure in order to make this happen. And so the construction industry really has to think about what's required here. We can't just have a smart city. We have to really build this to make this happen. And that's what's really nice about this, is we have a construction community that's able to get more permitting and doing things that enable all of these things to happen. Right now, when we look at that, how is that enabling for the next generation to see the capabilities that are involved and what our workforce needs to be looking at to be able to do some of these things?
Well, it is a huge challenge and an exciting opportunity for the construction industry. We're going to have to build $270 billion worth of capital expenditure.
200, and you said billion, right? I heard the B there.
That's right, over the next 5 to 10 years. This is an unprecedented investment in our wireless networks, and it's going to require construction work on all different levels. I mean, we have to put fiber in. A big part of that is putting fiber in, which means digging up the streets. We want to make sure we dig once and put a lot of fiber in when we do that, because 5G antennas require a fiber connection. It requires antennas inside of buildings, rewiring buildings, outside of buildings being placed there with connectivity to fiber, more work on cell towers. Every place that is now touched by wireless needs to be upgraded, and we need to add perhaps as many as 800,000 new sites for antennas to deal with this equipment. And I can go into the reasons if you want, but for the construction industry, it's a big, big opportunity. And as you mentioned, in terms of skilled labor, I don't think we're where we need to be. There's a lot of training that needs to be done in order to get people ready for this.
But let's talk about that specifically, because I think we don't recognize the problem here with a skilled labor shortage. We have an industry that says that, but we're not doing the right things to upskill our employees to understand that. We keep talking about it, but we're not doing enough things. What can we do? Leadership for this needs to start at the top. If we understand we have a skilled labor shortage, why aren't our construction companies and others doing enough to say, look, let's train. This is where we've got the jobs right now, the opportunity. Why aren't we doing more with this right now?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, the construction industry is already running into skilled labor shortage just with basic construction. Add on top of that the sort of technical complexity of building a wireless network. It's a lot of old construction skills, but it also means you have to understand the radio frequency environment you're operating in. You have to understand how these antennas are configured. And I think, the reason to answer your question is the educational system has not kept pace with the needs of our industry. It hasn't kept pace with the needs of construction, and it certainly hasn't kept pace with the rapid growth in the wireless industry. So we're actually taking it upon ourselves as a trade association, the Wireless Infrastructure Association, to create our own training programs. We have a program called the Telecommunications Education Center, where we will, go to employers and have work done on site, have work done in the field, have work done online to help get their workers ready for this wireless 5G revolution. And we've established an apprenticeship program. A lot of, I think, people in the construction industry are longtime, people that have used the apprenticeship model, but telecommunications has not. It's a whole new approach for our industry. So we're trying to bring apprenticeships into our industry through the Telecommunications Industry Registered Apprenticeship Program.
Don't you think the government needs to do more in stepping up here? I mean, I'm not picking on the government in general, but we have this great opportunity to really encourage this next generation to be excited. Construction is still a viable industry. And when we talk about 5G, the opportunities are endless. The innovation opportunities alone, when I just think of smart cities, when I think about so many other things we can do in innovation, I get so stoked about it. But I think we can get this young generation fired up to do so much more.
That's right. They get wireless. They use it constantly. If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Which
is great for our industry, but it means that they're going to be interested too. They get it. They understand what this is all about, and this industry is going to grow. I mean, as maybe we're eliminating some industries. If you work in a toll booth, you don't love wireless, but if you're thinking about the industries of the future.
Well, the mundane jobs are going to go away. Well, you and I get it. I don't mean to interrupt, but we get it. The mundane jobs are going to go away, but the really great, innovative, fast jobs are going to be here. But it doesn't mean we're eliminating, we're creating new jobs. Let's look at what the opportunities are, right?
Yeah, we're estimating that this industry alone, 5G, is going to create 500,000 new jobs in this sector, as well as other sectors that are going to benefit from these new wireless networks. So yeah, let's train young people. Let's get them on an apprenticeship track so that they have a career. It isn't just, hey, I'm going to build these networks, then they're done. If you have like a wireless LAN in your house, it needs to be constantly adjusted. You need like an electrical engineer to get that figured out. That's the same. Imagine building that on steroids in every room in the country, practically, in every place outdoors. Right. So the constant need to maintain these systems and upgrade them when you get to 6G and 7G and beyond. So these jobs are going to continue to grow, high-paying jobs right out of the chute. Let's train people and get the job done.
So how do we do it now between the gap that we have now to get this trained and skilled labor? We've got a shortage right now. What do we do in the interim while we're getting there? Is there some advice that you're giving companies to say, look, we've got to fill this gap time period that we have? What do we do?
So they need to, get these workers on a training path right now. There's an issue with recruitment as well we're experiencing in our industry. And
Huge.
Drop construction, certainly in wireless. So what they need to do is, they can look to resources that exist, like the Telecommunications Education Center, that we have at WIA, other training opportunities to get things going. We have some companies that are beginning to work with their local community college to establish courses and programs there that they're then using to feed into their own business. It's a worthwhile investment. These are mid-sized construction companies, contractors, power and electric contractors that are saying, hey, I see a problem. They're willing to invest, and it's a long-term solution because you need to put a lot of time and effort, resources to get your local community college or technical school to do it. But once you get that set up, you have yourself a pipeline of young people that are trained, that are excited to get into this industry, and that's part of the solution. We need to work with educational institutions. You're right, the government needs to get on top of it, the Department of Labor. Trump administration strongly supports apprenticeships, and we're working with them to get apprenticeships into our industry. Let's get DOL to focus on 5G jobs, as well as the broader construction skilled worker shortage.
Now, let's just be clear about this. We're not building up too much hype, right? I mean, there's some that are saying that we're building up too much hype around 5G. Are we not? I mean, we believe that there's a lot of growth there, but are we building up too much hype around 5G?
Well, we've done a number of studies that show that there is a lot of work to be done here. And that you heard the numbers. I mean, we're estimating, based on an Accenture study, $270 billion in capital investment. I mean, any construction industry's ears are going to go up when they
exactly. They love that. They love that. That's their future. That's their bread and butter.
That's real investment, and it's very big future. It's worth training and getting your workforce ready for that kind of work, because there's going to be a lot of work to be done. And right now, there aren't enough companies that are basically qualified to do it. If you already know how to lay fiber, you know how to do electric, you're one step ahead, because that's a big part of it. But I think companies that know how to lay fiber need to learn how to stick that antenna at the end of the fiber so they can compete with other companies that are doing that, because these margins are going to be very, very good, particularly in the early stages as there's this big shortage.
Jonathan Adelstein, President and CEO of the Wireless Infrastructure Association, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Let's go through my final thoughts for today on how to build smart cities and infrastructure of tomorrow. There's no better way than to look at one case study, and then I'm going to give you my 3 steps to success for your city. The story of the Smart Columbus started back in 2016 and continues today. The city competed against 77 others to win the US DOT Smart City Challenge. Now, it received a whopping $50 million grant funding from the DOT and the Paul G. Allen Philanthropies. Well, with this funding, it established the Smart Columbus operating system, which is the backbone of the Smart City initiatives. The data gathered measured the performance and the progress of the grant. Some of the technology deployed kind of includes all of these things, and let me go through them with you. A connected vehicle environment, a multimodal trip planning app, mobility assistance for people with cognitive disabilities, smart mobility hubs, connected electric autonomous vehicles, and truck platooning for logistic vehicles. At the end of the last year, it announced the city's first self-driving shuttle that is open to the public. And by the end of 2020, it hopes to educate 1 million city officials, policymakers, and business leaders on Smart Columbus successes and challenges. So what have we learned from all of this in this example? We need 3 things to build Smart City from the ground up: funding, Smart City strategy, and constant evolution of the city and the infrastructure. Now let me explain. The impetus for getting Smart Columbus off the ground was funding from the US DOT. Not every dollar needs to come from the federal government. There are other options. Perhaps it's raising taxes or public and private partnerships, but the bottom line is the first step needs to be finding the funds. Next, the city needs a strategy. I can't stress this enough. Candidly, too often, this is where smart cities and infrastructure stall. Here's a good example of one that made it work. Over in Barcelona, it involves several local and regional stakeholders in the implementation of its smart city strategy. Now, this includes businesses and universities. The involvement is essential to identify the need and then find the best technology. Finally, a city needs to constantly evolve. Keep in mind, an initiative that worked for a city 5 years ago might not be a top priority today. Smart Columbus has done a great job of being transparent about this. Late last year, it unveiled the Smart Columbus Playbook. Now, what I really like about this is that it highlights best practice and perhaps even more importantly, program successes and challenges. The technology is going to change exponentially as we move forward. We need to talk about the real needs for our cities and our infrastructure. The more we envision the future, the more we can really make a vision a reality. It takes a team of innovators. We need to have all of us work together. We hope we have helped you, if not start, but continue your journey. Remember, the road to digital transformation is bumpy, but certainly worth the effort. So thanks for watching. Construct Tech TV, your fierce advocates for construction.